reducing our emissions, but also by adaptation with better weather warning systems and defenses against floods and overheating, etc. Now that we've learnt about the different components of what needs to be considered throughout the first 5 workshops, we can focus today on how to pull all these together to put our net zero strategy in place. So here again, our specialist, Adam Baker from Inspired Energy will be taking us through that right now. But before we start, I just want to run a quick poll and we'll discuss the results. So I'm launching the poll now. Oops, sorry. This is the next one. So there we go. So hopefully you can see it on your screens now. And I'll leave you just a few minutes to fill it in. The questions are very easy. We've asked the same questions right at the beginning of the series, but it's always interesting to see how this evolves with time. So that's why we're asking them again. So thank you for your patience. So there's about 21 out of 31 who have voted. So maybe just a few seconds more. Yeah, I think we're getting to the end of this. So, right, so most of you haven't set the strategy yet, and most of you are actually planning to do so, which is good. Few of you are still undecided, and then I can't see the last question, what the last question was actually, but I think that was the same question. So we'll stop the poll here and hand over to Adam. So.
Good morning.
Oh, sorry, I haven't shared the results, sorry. So here were the results, but apologies, Adam. Right, so I will stop sharing the results. You've got them very clearly. And we'll now go to Adam. There we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. For the 6th and final time, thank you for having us. So we've been through 5 previous sessions. 4 of those have really focused on the kind of elements of demystifying net zero, and one of them about funding. But today, really, we start bringing all of that together, I suppose, into how you start considering how to set your net zero strategy. Slide, please. If we first just do a quick recap of where we've been through, so I'll do this as quickly as I can, and we'll get to kind of the meat of today's session. But we started with demystifying kind of what net zero is and what that journey needs to look like, and that underpins what we're going to talk about a great deal today. So fundamentally, it starts with understanding your data, so gathering and collating your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions data, certainly scopes 1 and 2. Understanding kind of what that then means in terms of your existing baseline, your carbon footprint. And then it's about setting out on a journey to what is net zero by 2050. So we would see that running in a simplistic sense, that you do the low cost and no cost options. Then you tell people what you've done. Then you start looking at the kind of potential efficiency gains through process improvement, potential plant replacement, the kind of medium cost options, I suppose. Then you start looking at the on-site generation potential, and that's where you're starting to tick into larger scale CapEx and sort of potentially how that really influences and works with your business, and comes with quite a lot of thinking and design. And then you look at green energy procurement to kind of deal with the rest of the kind of indirect emissions through scope 2. And then there's probably going to be some left. And at the end of that, you look at offsetting some of that. Now, what we've talked about throughout all of this is that the timeline for doing that is going to vary from business to business. But actually, this isn't necessarily a linear journey. So we're aware that lots of businesses will have gone straight to solar because actually you've got roof space, you've got an advantage in doing that. So why wouldn't you have done that already? That's not wrong. It's part of the journey towards your net zero ambitions. Slide, please. We've then looked at what constitutes, thanks, Brigitte, what constitutes emissions. So your emissions are broken down into scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is your direct emissions. That's your fuels, your refrigerants, and your transport. Scope 2 is your indirect. So that's your electricity, your electric vehicles, your any district heating. If you have that, it doesn't tend to influence or impact this audience so much. And then scope 3 is your up and downstream, so your supply chain, I suppose. So upstream, that's kind of your raw material, how that gets to you, the carbon intensity or the carbon emissions of that particular material as it gets to you. And downstream, that's how your product then influences, I suppose, in some the rest of it, your customers, and then beyond that to their product life cycle, if you take it to the nth degree. So that's your up and your downstream scope 3 emissions. All of that wrapped together is your impact from an emissions point of view. Slide, please. And then finally, last month, we talked about communicating that. And effectively, communication can be broken down into four elements. There's the stuff you have to do because it's mandatory, things like streamlined energy carbon reporting and ESOS, energy saving opportunity scheme. You have to do these things. So if you've done them, you've got the data, it's promoted for you naturally. You've got the things that you can do voluntarily, and that's from simply making a PR statement to say that we're going to be net zero by a date in time, through to things like science-based targets, carbon disclosure projects, and some other elements we'll touch on later on today. It could just be that you're needing to communicate to your supply chain up and down it, that actually it's part of your sales narrative now that your product is more sustainable than your competitors. And then the often forgotten element of the communication about your net zero ambitions is about how do you communicate that to your own people? Because as we're going to talk about shortly, if you don't have engagement from your own staff, it becomes quite a challenging thing to be able to push this through, because you have to have a business that is is engaged with the idea of becoming net zero by a point in time, because you're asking probably quite a lot of work of people, and they have to be with you on that journey. So it's important you communicate internally, almost as more important than your external communications. Slide, please. So that's how we've got to today. So setting your net zero strategy, what we're going to try and work through today are the core principles, I suppose, of how you would choose to set your net zero strategy, and some of the options that you've got along the way, and some of the considerations that we would put in place if we were doing this for you. So hopefully we're not giving you too many trade secrets, but just enough to help you out along the way. So slide, please. So the first thing for us to consider, or we would consider with you, would be the scope and ambition of your strategy. So at a basic level, all of you who are listening to this call, who are working for a business, have a target on you already, and that's to achieve net zero by 2050. It's enshrined in law. We're all committed to it, whether we like it or not. Your choice beyond that is whether you try and do something more aggressive than that and try and do it sooner, or simply how you look to achieve that goal as a minimum. What's really important for us to always understand is or for you to understand is what are the constraints that may exist around your business about what is realistically achievable and by what date. So what pressure do you have from your employees? Do you have an environmentally sensitive employee base? Are they looking to encourage you as an employer to be more environmentally friendly, to lower your carbon footprint, to be out there publicly saying that we're trying to do positive things about the environment? That could be a pressure, could be an opportunity, could be a restriction, depending on the answer to that question. It would be remiss of us to talk about ambition and scope of strategy if we didn't consider process limitations. There are some who may be listening to this call who will be limited by what is possible because of what they do and how it is done. And there are inherent challenges within that. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it will create limitations. Something that's really quite interesting, I think, and we're seeing this more and more, in kind of anecdotal discussions that we're having, is that the conflicting roles and objectives that may exist within an organization. So the desire to have a product as cheap as possible from a procurement point of view, but the need for that to be responsibly and sustainably sourced may well be at a conflicting price point. And it's really important that actually everybody within an organization is aligned, that actually there is a preparedness to pay potentially a premium for a more sustainable product, if that is the goal of the business, to be net zero by, let's say, 2035 instead of 2050. These are the kind of choices that may have to be made, or objectives be aligned to make sure that there's harmony within an organization. Similarly, CapEx priorities. There's an issue. An issue is probably not the right word, but there is a consideration to be made at the moment about not baking in new carbon into your business. And what we mean, but let me give you an example of what we mean by that. So we're doing some work at the moment with a food manufacturer who supplies one of the major food retailers. And they are looking at a science-based target at the moment, which they could achieve quite easily through green procurement of power and gas. Very simple process. They're also looking at the moment about investing multiple millions in a CHP unit into their site, which would be gas powered. That bakes in carbon into their process for the next pretty much 20 years. Now, that makes achieving their net zero goals and hitting their science-based targets almost impossible without fundamentally changing a huge raft of other things within their process. So it's really important that you make sure you consider how your CapEx thoughts about how you're doing other things and what that impact that might have. And this is a little bit like conflicting roles and objectives, making sure your business is aligned. You're listening to your customers and your suppliers. Clearly, they're going to be driving your behavior. The example I just gave you is exactly that the customer is driving them to a science-based target, which means it's going to change the way that they think about their CapEx. You'll see how these are all sort of linked. And then there's the perception that often has to be kind of dealt with here in terms of the ambition, which is, it's fine, we'll do it in 2030 something. It'll be fine, we'll still have 15 years to do it. The reality of carbon emissions at the moment is that actually, and we'll touch on this in a later slide, is that if you do nothing, the problem, it becomes a compound problem to resolve later on. So actually, incremental improvements now make the problem much easier to solve further down the line. As everything becomes less carbon intensive, if everyone's doing their bit, it becomes much easier to reach the end goal. So I think beware of kind of it not being urgent. I think now is the time to strike, I think we've touched on. And then finally, the last element is the opportunities that exist. So what's going to help you to succeed? Engagement with this concept is what will help you to succeed, and engagement across the organization. So if people are committed to doing this and committed to the same end goal, the net result is that you will have a business pulling in the same direction. You won't be going 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. You'll be generally moving in a maybe feel small, but constantly forward direction. I think that is a really important thing to take away. So slide please, sorry. So where do you start with this? I think this is always the problem with where do you start with setting strategy. First and foremost, for for us, it would be to get the stakeholder group engaged and create, we'll call it a workshop for the purposes of this, but you can call them, if you don't like workshops, you can call them kind of whatever you wish. But what's really important is that throughout this process, and this is where we've seen this succeed much better than areas where this hasn't happened, is that you get all of the potential stakeholders in a single room. So you make sure that you've got someone from finance in the room, so that actually that they're engaged with what we're trying to achieve, so they understand and can perhaps guide you in terms of what budget might be available. They can start thinking about what budgets need to be made available in future years. So that hopefully will allow the procurement process to kind of take effect. So actually the procurement guys understand that what their margins are to work within, what their kind of objectives are, that you've got marketing in there from communication, so internal and external comms. But actually, really importantly for a lot of businesses on this call will be actually the element of competitor analysis. Now, that may well sit with sales as well, and customer facing guys, they'll hear what the competitors are up to too. But whoever it is that controls that degree of competitor analysis needs to be in that room, because you don't want to get left behind versus the competition. I think that's going to be a really important element too, because as the sales guys will no doubt be seeing, and anyone working customer facing at the moment, sustainability is on the agenda. We've said this before. We've had some articles go out from Inspired, from our division called the Icon recently, which has talked about the likelihood that anyone bidding for public sector work, but government contracts and the like, 50% of the scoring is going to relate to your sustainability criteria in due course. That is a huge weighting that businesses are going to have to kind of consider. And I think it will start influencing how successful you are as you move forward. I know we've talked about on nearly every session, we've talked about this, the future of sales and retention being around actively showing that you're trying to be a sustainable business. And I think that's an important element. It's about trying to do these things. You don't have to be there, but you have to be on some kind of pathway to doing that. And then finally, making sure that you've got, and it's probably silly to say this, but you've got your compliance health. We've said it's the HSE here, but in a lot of cases, HSE is health, safety, quality, and is growing as a role. If you've got ESG directors, sustainability directors, if you now have them, whoever it is taking the role, and often the environmental lead, they need to be in that room. Goes without saying. So what you're trying to do in that room is you're trying to really understand and set the scene for what you're trying to achieve. So you can go back one, sorry, Brigitte. So what you're trying to do with that stakeholder group is set the scene for where you're trying to get to, which is net zero. What does that mean to your business? You need to lay out for everybody in the room, what are we already doing around net zero? Where have we started? How much have we done already? Because all of you will be on some kind of journey already. You'll have done something that would constitute net zero. So this could be ESOS, so Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme, could be Stream Energy Carbon Reporting or SECA. You might have climate change agreements. You might already be in MinMet. So you are already aware of your impacts from an energy use and an emissions point of view. But what you're really trying to do is educate your stakeholder group, but also you're trying to flesh out anybody that's incredibly positive about what we're trying to do, trying to glean the general attitude towards net zero, and dare I say, flesh out any cynicism, and make sure that everybody's engaged with this and that you've got an accord in terms of how you move forward. And then set out where you think you might be on that journey already, and then start sketching out where you think you might want to go. And part of that kind of where you are now, slide please, is understanding kind of the opportunities that already exist. And we've talked about this in previous sessions, but at a very basic level, if you've done, in inverted commas, nothing, then start with a very simple energy audit. Either do it yourselves or get somebody in to take a view on the site and say, right, these are the very basic low-hanging fruit options that you might have available to you. And part of that will be perhaps some of the bigger ticket items, some of the renewable opportunities, the on-site generation that might be there, and all of the above. Understand if you've bought green energy, and if you haven't, then you can do it, because it's a very simple way of reducing your overall emissions, very simply. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are exploring electric cars and vans. The range is a problem, charging points, all the things we understand, but don't park that as a kind of, we've done it, it's not working. That probably has to be reviewed certainly every couple of years, and probably every year that data needs to be refreshed, because that technology is improving, the infrastructure is improving all the time. So it really is about making sure that your information on that is up to date. And then make sure you consider what your cost of carbon offsets are. Now, it's not necessarily our prescribed route as an organisation Inspired. We tend to look at offsets as the final piece in the jigsaw. But there is a counter that you offset at the start, and then use that as a kind of an overall fund for your carbon emissions reduction over time. So you start doing things each year, and then you start whittling away at how much offset you have to do. So there are ways to do that. And then from a scope 3 point of view, working out what your scope 3 emissions look like. And there's some very large projects out there in terms of scope 3, because it's a huge undertaking for some businesses. But there is an SME, scope 3 solution, which is kind of presenting itself at the moment, which we might touch on a little bit later. Sorry, slide please. So if you've understood your opportunities, you've worked out sort of in principle where you think you might be, it's time to start thinking about modeling kind of what that journey would look like over the period of time that you think might be suitable for your business. So what we have is just some purely indicative kind of figures, just to provide you an idea of what no cost, what kind of the investment needed would be, and then what it would look like to get to actual net zero over the term. So if you do nothing, then clearly, gradually over time, in many respects, your emissions are just going to rise. There will be a gradual increase in your business. If you do nothing, then your absolute carbon emissions will probably tick up over a period of time. What you can see there is the kind of proportionate investments you may need. Now, obviously, these are proportionate to the scale of the business that we're talking about. But in this example, the data said that if you made £1 million investment with a 2-year payback, you could see a 25% carbon reduction. That'd be one ticket item. If you make significant investment or more significant over time based on a science-based target, that's a 4% year-on-year reduction, you would actually get to you'd reduce your carbon emissions by 70%. Now, interestingly, that doesn't get you to zero. So the science-based target doesn't actually get you all the way to zero in this instance. In order to actually completely offset your emissions by in this case, 2035 and beyond, then actually you'd need to offset £500,000. So proportionately, that percentage of your investment each year in offsets in order to be actually net zero as a business. Now, the figures here are kind of relatively arbitrary, but what the principle would be is to actually consider, and this is why the stakeholder group is so important, is where do you think that you could get to on what does doing nothing look like in 2050? What does a low cost, what does a medium cost, and what does the absolute solution need to look like for my business to achieve net zero by 2050? Now, this may not be something you're able to do yourself. This is where someone like us would come in. We can come in and take that data and help you to make sense of that and create these models for you. Again, speak to myself or Dan, who's on the call somewhere, and he'll no doubt introduce himself later on. And we can help you talk through how this might look and how we might help you model this for you as part of a workshop session. Next slide, please. Another animation, please. Thank you. So when it comes to choosing a target, it's really important to choose something that works for your business. So as we've talked about with communication, is that some businesses on this call will be compelled to do certain things, to be part of certain initiatives because your major customers are driving you in that direction. So the major food retailers, are putting pressure on their supply chains to have some science-based targets. Major car manufacturers, the aerospace primes, all of these guys will in time create, if they're not already, will start to create this pressure through the tiered supply system, the tiered supply chain. It's almost inevitable that will be the case, whether it's overt or through kind of the way that contracts are tendered, whatever else, there will be pressure applied over time, we believe. The most common and probably the one that you'll hear most referenced is science-based targets. So science-based targets are an internationally recognized initiative that in essence requires you to create a year-on-year reduction in your carbon emissions at scope 1 and 2, and to make pledges against how you would drive down your scope 3. So this effectively, it's encouraging everybody to then engage with the rest of their supply chain about how they can do it. This is why some of the larger entities are encouraging their supply chain to consider science-based targets, because they're being compelled under their own science-based target to reduce their scope 3 emissions. So that you can see how this knock-on effect can happen. The science-based targets are relatively rigorous. Well, they are quite rigorous. You have to, there's quite a lot of data required and obviously scientific evidence to prove that you are reducing in absolute terms. That's not necessarily, if you're not being compelled or persuaded, that's not necessarily an attractive proposition for potentially for smaller entities. We understand that. So it's really important then to consider what's going to be proportionate for you and what are you going to align yourself to. So we have had some dealings recently with parts of Make UK in the Southwest, where there are organisations that are aligning themselves with some local government targets, because that works better for them locally. That's the incentive. That's the kind of the public kind of target that they're able to kind of align themselves with, and that's providing some comfort and some idea that's giving what they're doing some credibility, because it's aligned with somebody else. Similarly, any part of your supply chain, as said before, not everybody is doing science-based targets at the moment, but they have their own goals. So in previous sessions, we've talked about some of the other organisations that are out there with with stated ambitions. If you were a supplier to Sky TV have pledged, I think it's to be carbon net zero by 2030, I think it is. So if you're supplying them something, you may have chosen to, you may choose to align yourself with that ambition because that plays well as a supplier to that business. I'm not suggesting everybody does that, but it's about choosing the right thing for you as an organisation. B Corp status is always an option. You've got aligning yourself with the UN Global Accord on Climate Change, which is to try and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Many of you will already have climate change agreements. Climate change agreements come with targets to be more efficient on the use of on the way that you produce products. And it could be that you decide to look at something like the RE100 commitment to be 100% renewable. Some of these are more simple than others. Now, there's one on there, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This is a piece of legislation that we're expecting to come in, comes in 22 for large financial institutions, and then there's a rolling program as it hits larger entities. But TCFD is typically aimed at larger entities, as I say. Typically it's 500 staff or more at the moment. What it requires them to do is to understand and do a risk assessment on climate change on their business. And that's everything from flood risks to production facilities to the impact of bushfires worldwide and how that might impact their supply chain. The reason that we have that on there is that understanding that this is in the ether may help you to understand why potentially you get questionnaires and information requests from other people for information to be supplied. And actually, the reason that we have it on here is that if you're collating data around your net zero ambitions now, it makes it much easier to answer these questions and you to be somebody that's much easier to do business with than somebody that can't. And I think it's about, and a lot of this for those of you out there that kind of don't see how you can help the kind of the efforts to net zero by 2050. Actually, so a lot of what we're talking about here is about helping you to help yourself when it comes to dealing with some of these larger entities where this is a problem and they are being mandated to do some of this stuff. And I think that's the point here, is that it's about doing the right thing locally for yourself, but also then it's about everybody looking after their scope 1 and 2 so that the scope 3 problem gradually dissipates. Slide, please. So just to say that we show that we kind of, I suppose, put our money where our mouth is as an organisation. So Inspired PLC are already committed to being carbon neutral, and that was from 2020. We managed that on all consumption related emissions. So we've done that on what we call a market basis, which basically means that we have done that through green electricity, green gas certificates, and then because effectively that's a huge proportion of our consumption, and then we've offset anything left using carbon offsets to be carbon neutral by 2020. So we're a service business. We don't produce anything. There's a limit to what we can do immediately, but this is a solution to make us carbon neutral immediately. What we've committed to doing is by 2035 to have an absolute reduction in our carbon emissions using what you might call non-market methods. So this is actually not consuming the fossil fuels in the first place. And that's in line with the UN Global Initiative and the 1.5 degree pathway. And these are our commitments as a business. So we're not compelled to do these things. This is what we have chosen to do because we believe it's the right thing to do. And we believe it's certainly realistic to overachieve, we think, on the 2035 option. Slide, please. So when you've done all of that, once you've understood what you're going to choose, when you've understood what your stakeholder group needs to look like, once you've understood where you are today, where the baselines are, you've understood what your basic opportunities are, you've modeled what you think the investment requirements are going to be to get to net zero, you've opted and chosen for a target which works for your organization, be that something voluntary, something mandated, science-based targets, or simply just a number that you believe, or a date in time that you believe is achievable for you. You need to track it, you need to report on it, and then quite frankly, all you have to do then is repeat that every year until you get there. And in essence, that comes down to the basics that we've talked about all along, which is understand your position, scope your opportunities, take action, shout about your success, and then start again with where are you at now? Slide, please. And this is the construct of the support network that we're putting in place with Make UK, that it's helping businesses, whatever the scale of the requirement is, to understand your carbon footprint at scope 1 and 2, or at scope 1, 2, and 3, upstream and downstream, to the extremes that you are you require support. That you do some degree of site survey work. Now, site survey is not always an energy audit. It may well, if you haven't done one, that's where you start. But it's about actually understanding, what have you had done? Who's walked the site? Have you had engineers looking at heat exchangers? Have you looked at ground source heat pumps? Have you looked at solar? Have you decided that you can't put a wind turbine in the car park in the middle of a city? Whatever it is that you've looked at and decided, get that information out and understand it, because it all forms part of your journey to net zero. Project implementation, get stuck in. You got to do something. It's time. The time is now to start putting some of this stuff into practice if you haven't already. And as I said before, you track and report what you've done. And all of that forms part of the toolkits that we're providing, regardless of the scale or size of your operation, that your toolkit will be the one that you need. As I've said many times through these workshops, no two businesses are going to have the same journey to net zero. And neither is it a linear journey for a lot of organizations. You pick the right solution. So a low cost, no cost, or simple low hanging fruit for one business will be different to another. For some, the easy option is solar on the roof. It just works for some businesses. So that may well be your starting point. So be it. That's not wrong. It's a step in the journey. But then understanding that actually, if you do solar with a battery, does that make it even more viable than where you started? And I think this is the point of the journey that we've all been on together over the last 6 episodes, is that net zero will be different for all of you, but it is achievable, but the journey does need to start today. Thank you for your time. Next slide, please. I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to everybody that's tuned in. I know that lots of people have listened to every episode and have been here. We can see that through the names that we recognise. And thank you. And, you know, the number of customers on here who have come to us since we've started these sessions as well. So thank you. We've really enjoyed delivering them. I hope everybody's got a great deal out of them. So thank you very much for your time. And I think it's probably any questions.
If anybody wants to pop questions in the chat, if they don't want to speak up, but yeah, happy for you to start popping your hand up and Rachel.
I think, Dawn, before we do that, sorry, I just wanted to say what's next, really, and do the snap poll very quickly before, then we can have the questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
So so thank you, Adam, again, really for I think a really excellent series of workshops and your expertise. That was really great. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope that all our attendees and participants have as well. So just a few words on what's next, really. So in terms of training, because obviously it's quite a big part of what we want to do for our members is Make UK to support you. And so we're preparing with our health, HS and sustainability colleagues at our centre in Woodland Grange, a whole array of webinars and workshops to delve into each topic that we covered here in much more depth, and there'll be more technical courses on specific aspects, for example, process improvements and buildings improvements, etc. That will be for the winter, most likely after the COP or early 2022. We'll keep you posted, but of course we will continue to partner with Inspired Energy and ABGI for specialist expertise, so they will continue to be there for you. And the toolkit that Adam just represented to us remains active and available to all the members. Currently, we're just busy generating our sectoral net zero roadmap, working with Inspired Energy again, and that should be launched in time for the COP26. So you might have seen the invitations that were sent earlier this week to the consultations to gather your views. And so we really encourage you to participate so that we can get to a meaningful and representative end product for the roads to net zero. And in the meantime, if you have or want to prepare any case studies so that we can showcase what you're doing on our website, please just let us know, and we'll guide you on how to do them if you haven't done them. So yeah, so thank you. That was all I wanted to say, and I'll just run the Q&A, sorry, the snap poll before we run the Q&A. That will only just take a few minutes again. So let's launch it. God. Yes, so hopefully you can see that on your screen now. So there's quite a few questions. The first two are really for those who have set their strategy, and then the others who haven't, they can go straight to question 3. Is there a problem with multiple answers? Probably looks like it is. We don't have the choice to put several answers. I'm guessing. Or maybe. Okay, no, it seems to be working. Yeah, we're giving you more time to answer because I think only half of you have voted. I think everyone's voted. So Dawn, can I ask you to take the results? I will share the results now. So it's interesting. So we've asked those who have set their strategy whether which functions in their company have they engaged with. And so the majority is for finance, but there seems to be quite a good spread. So you're doing the right thing. I believe all the functions are involved. Now, we can't say if they're involved for each company, but clearly, well, the budget is key. So that's not surprising. There's also quite a significant proportion, for nearly 40%, who don't know just yet. So then for question 2, for those, again, for those who have set their strategy, so who is taking the lead? So that's quite interesting as well. So no one in finance, and the majority is the CEO. And that's, I think that's really good, because we know that things do get rolled out right down through the company when the top management does take the lead. So it's really good news that. I'll just note the results down as well. No one from procurement, that's quite interesting. And facilities, 6%. Obviously, buildings are really important. So I would say that do involve your your assets manager or facilities management, because buildings, there are a significant proportion of the carbon emissions. Obviously, they're not part of, if you want, the manufacturing sector has constitutes 11% of carbon emissions, but then buildings also constitute probably commercial and industrial buildings as just as much. So it's a big issue, and we must not forget that. So buildings improvements, it's all part of it. For number 3, for those who haven't set a strategy, and so it's good news that you are considering to do that now. So that's great. And then overall, have you found the series, anyone who's interested in continuing to participate in further training and education? Yes, that's the majority of you, so that's really great to hear. And finally, would you be interested in a free session with Inspired Energy to discuss net zero? Again, half of you, so that's a great result. Adam, I don't know if you've got any further comments on any of those before I stop sharing.
I can't see them on screen at the moment, actually, Brigitte. So
oh, I'm so sorry.
So yeah, okay. I
was sharing.
I think the encouraging news there is that its owner managers, CEOs that seem to be driving this process at the moment, which I think is really really fascinating. But it looks, on the whole, that there's really good coverage there in terms of the kind of roles that are engaged as well. I think that it's a fairly even split, which would suggest that most people have got somebody involved in some form or another. Sales and marketing lowest. I think that's kind of what I'd expect to see. And then, I think who's taking the lead, I think is really, really important. 38% MD CEOs, 13%, so, nearly half. In fact, over half of businesses, it's being driven by the people in charge, which I think is a really positive thing. It's much easier. This is being pushed down from an engagement point of view from the top, rather than sort of being driven from underneath. So really, really encouraging results. So thank you everybody for engaging.
Okay, brilliant. So over to questions and answers. I think we had Rachel had a hand up before. I don't know if you would like to ask your question now, Rachel.
Hi there. It wasn't actually a question. I was giving a round of applause, saying thank you.
Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. And any more questions?
So just for the purposes of anybody listening, obviously on record, if you've got any questions at this point, then please feel free to send them to us at makeuk@inspiredenergy.co.uk, and we will that comes directly to myself and Dan. So we'll respond to any questions we get there. Obviously, continue to contact us through the regional directors, and they will always forward the question on to us. If we can answer it, we will. If we think that there's someone better placed, then we'll find someone better placed to answer the question. But please do come back to us. It's, as I say, it's been a great few sessions, and we're really grateful for the opportunity. So please do give us a shout, even if it feels quite menial.
Yeah, I can back you up on that. Again, I hope everyone's found today's session useful. It has been a really good series of workshops. I think everybody's kind of, we're learning as we're going along with this ourselves. These are, as you talked about before, it's a new law, and it's not that we're all of a sudden the experts, but we are taking that responsibility to ensure we're imparting with that expertise as best we can to make sure our members get really good value from this program. Looking forward to the next round of what we're going to be doing. So Adam, very great thanks to you and the team from Inspired Energy. Obviously, Dan's in the background there. Sorry, Dan, I didn't introduce you earlier on, but I do hope you found today useful too. I will be putting together all the information from today's event and the recording and sending it out. Those of you who do want a little bit more information, we'll be doing those introductions as well to Adam and the team. So that's it from me. Good luck with the journey, and we'll see you on the next round.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dawn. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Are we staying on for a catch up?